All right, today I just wanted to go through a couple different things that I do during my day. We've got a Yamaha Maxim 750 that we've stripped down already, and what we have here is a couple totes of roughly 80 to 100 parts. Now what we're going to do after we've got that motorcycle stripped down, I've done several videos on how we do that, the process of that. Now what we do is we have all these parts that need cleaned up, maybe use a damp rag, just wipe them down, check electrical connectors, check, make sure parts are functioning, make sure levers aren't broke. You can see here we've got a big old hole in this switch here. Just make sure we point stuff like that out if we're going to sell parts like this, and a switch like this we're just going to go ahead and throw away. We might try to keep the bottom portion, see if something like that's salvageable, but you don't want to take and sell a part that's completely got dust all over it. Maybe a sticker was stuck on there at one time. Take some kind of a cleaner and just wash that off really well. A speedometer like this, I like to double check odometer and speedometer readings. So what I do is I'll take a screwdriver, just a small flat screwdriver there, put it in my impact, very carefully put it in here. Make sure it's secure if you're doing this, and then put your impact in reverse. If you spin it there, you can see that that gauge will go up to about 40 miles an hour is what this DeWalt 20 volt max can do. And don't have a very good charge on it right now. Otherwise, maybe I can get up into the 60 mile an hour range. And then I like to put about 1/10 of a mile on these dashes here. What I could potentially do is hire somebody for the next 2 years. They could sit there and hold that impact in the forward position, run that odometer down to 0. Obviously, not very cost effective by doing that. Also, what we like to do when we got switches off like this, we pulled cables off. Sometimes we'll sell these cables like this separately. So what I do is I'll take and mark these, because down the road when we go to list these parts online, I'm not going to have a clue, nor by the picture am I going to know, okay, this is a choke cable. So I just throw a tag on there just for quick reference. I'll be able to see what those parts are. Starters is another thing we like to test. You can just pretty easily test those, hook those up to a battery if you've got a good charge on a battery. Make sure there's no unusual noises. Make sure there's no oil residue around here. Just clean it up really good for pictures. That'd be another thing you can do. We take fenders. You can see here we've got all kinds of cobwebs, stuff like that. Just take a rag, brush this all out, clean it up really good. Get stuff like that ready for pictures. Front fenders, something with a little more value to them. You know, this one's got scuffs and scratches, stuff like that, but if we've got a great front fender, we'll take and we'll maybe polish that up really well before going and taking pictures of it. Electrical components are a big thing. I like to inspect those, make sure that those are in good condition, make sure connectors on those, say a CDI box or an ignition coil, regulator, rectifier, those will a lot of times have common problems. Connectors break, people are disassembling those and end up breaking those parts. We've got our seat latch here with our helmet lock here. I like to match keys up with parts like this, and I like to sell those as a kit. So we've got ignition switch, we've got helmet lock and seat. Sometimes we have steering stem lock. Sometimes, obviously, ignition coil, fuel tank cap. I don't know if I've said that already. The other thing we'll do, we'll take parts like front forks here, and I'll pull this stem out of the forks here. Sell these forks separate. You can see here we left some parts still on these forks, and I've just got to work these parts off of there. That way we can sell this stem separate than the forks. A lot of times if guys are needing a pair of forks, they aren't also needing a steering stem. So I like to separate those out. Just make sure we're selling what people would want and the way they would want to buy it. So on this model, we have a helmet lock here, or a bike lock here, excuse me, a chain that's got a locking system on it. Kind of a cool thing Yamaha used to do back then. This fits in the toolbox, it attaches right to the bike, and you can just chain this motorcycle up to a power pole or a post or something, just to keep that bike secure. Kind of a cool idea. Again, more fender panels that we would just take and wipe stuff like this off. Make sure that we clean them up really good. We've got your igniter here, and again, this is kind of a more valuable part on the motorcycle. And we've tested stuff like this when we bring that bike in, just to make sure that that bike starts and runs, or at least has spark. And a lot of times in a separate video you can see the carburetor on this model was gummed up completely, so we never actually did get this bike to start, but we like to check for spark, make sure it's got good spark. That way you know the electrical components are good. Obviously, regulator rectifier, we can test those if we can't get your bike to start. A lot of times, a good test to do on those, if you can get your bike to start, is just get that battery up to, you know, rev the bike up, get that battery to the 14 volts or around there to make sure your regulator rectifier is, you know, stopping your voltage from exceeding what it should, and make sure that it's got enough charge in there to charge that battery up. So headlight housing, stuff like that, we like to go through, and you can see, you just, by putting them all in a tote, you've got random parts, you've got stuff that needs cleaned up, so I'll take a rag, just polish these up really good. If there's stains on them, sometimes I use carbon choke cleaner. A lot of times when I do that, I like to put it on the rag itself as opposed to spraying it directly onto these parts. Spraying it directly onto these parts, if you've got an area where the paint is starting to chip, you spray carbon choke cleaner on there or brake cleaner on there, it's just going to destroy that paint. So I like to do that. When you take these apart, a lot of times you got to take the headlights separate from the housing here. I don't remember this model if we had to do that completely, but I like to just put these back together. Sometimes you sell them complete like this, sometimes you individualize them all. Problem is, there's knockoff brands, cheap aftermarket stuff, not worth the money. But people feel like when you can get a headlight like this, you know, from Hong Kong for $3 and 50-cent shipping, we'll go ahead and buy the knockoff stuff, and it's hard to compete with that kind of stuff when you've got genuine, high-quality parts like this. And so if you clean them up, make them look really, really sharp, make sure there's no scratches or dings in them, a lot of times they're a little more valuable. And if the buyers are smart, they will buy even a used OEM part over a knockoff headlight, regulator rectifier, CDI box, stuff like that. It's not worth the money. 9 times out of 10, you're going to end up buying an OEM part after your knockoff brand doesn't work. Here's a regulator rectifier, kind of case in point. These regulator rectifiers you can get extremely cheap, you know, internationally, and some of those parts are just complete garbage. There's a couple aftermarket brands that I would suggest. I'll list those in the comments below. There's a lot of them that if you're spending, you know, $15 on a regulator rectifier, it's not going to work for you. You're going to be spending $80 here pretty soon to get a decent one. So a lot of times a good used OEM regulator rectifier, ignition coil, stuff like that is going to be better than, like I said, the knockoff stuff here. Ignition coils here, just inspect these. You can see, and we wouldn't have noticed this first round, but when we're pulling it off the bike, but you can see now, after taking a rag, kind of polishing it down a little bit, we've got a crack in this coil. Obviously, we're not going to sell it with a crack in it. We did have spark, but we're not going to sell a part that's broke and damaged. It's just not worth it for us to sell a part like that. Customer doesn't like it. They see that crack. They say, well, I want to return this. Well, now you've got, you know, $8 in shipping there. They want to return it back to you. It's another $8 in shipping, and you're refunding their full amount. Why sell it in the first place? Those ignition coils aren't worth that much money. Stuff like this, I like to keep the bolts in there. Again, take a rag. Something like this worth $20, $25. So I don't like to spend a lot of time detailing parts like this, because you're just never going to make your money back out of those if it takes you half an hour to detail it. You just kind of wasted a lot of time. Specialty bolts here, I like to keep those together. Now I will wipe down this stuff, get some of the oil residue off, some of the dirt and debris that's going to be bouncing around in the box with it. I'll take and rub that stuff off of there, and clean it up somewhat, but I'm not going to take and polish it. Now these specialty bolts, like I started to say earlier, I like to keep those in there with them. Separate, these specialty bolts like this are worth a couple dollars, cost you a couple dollars to ship it. It's not really worth it. But if you got a center stand like this, maybe worth $15, somebody sees that these specialty bolts are included. You know, if there's 20 of these center stands online, yours is the same price, maybe $3 more. Somebody's going to be more likely to buy yours because you've got these bolts included with it. So just try to use your head when you go to list stuff like that. How would you like to buy it? You know, if you want to buy it without the bolts in there, at that point, you don't know if these holes are wallered out and just by seeing these bolts in there, you can see that they're straight. You can see that there's no damage to the bolts. You can see, you know what, that's a better center stand than maybe the next guy that offers it for, you know, $2 less. Axles, I like to make sure we right away mark on those. Case in point here, we've got a front and we've got a rear. Now obviously, more than likely the rear is going to be the larger one, but sometimes they're a lot closer than these two are here. Now if we would have just grabbed a Sharpie from the get-go, wrote on there F or R, you know, front or rear, and we did that actually, so we're able to see those. When we go to take pictures, just real quick, snapping a picture, we can see, okay, that's the front, that's got an F on it. This is the rear, we got an R on there. That way it just saves a little bit of time when it comes time to list it, because we're taking these pictures, we don't know when we're going to list these parts. It might be months from now, might be years from now. We've got tens of thousands of parts that need listed, and we just can't take these pictures and list this part right after. So that's why it's important. Plus, when you go to ship this part out, we've got 2 axles in a box like this. It's maybe a little bit darker box to get into. It's hard to see. You like to pick that axle up and know right away, okay, that's an R. That's going to be the back. If these bolts were similar, you've got to sit there and compare them. Wonder, you know what, are the forks spread out? Or am I really grabbing the right one? So if we have those marked already, then you know you're grabbing the right one. Same way with shocks. Obviously, on motorcycles, you don't have a set of these up front, but on four-wheelers, you do. You've got a set. A lot of times they're similar in size, and if you just mark those front and rear, a lot of times right and left are the same on there, but front and rear, if you just mark those, put an R and an F, then you know where those go without having to take the time to do the research, look it up online to make sure you're grabbing the right one. So also what I like to do when I go to take pictures of these is I'll take a tape measure and I'll measure center of hole to center of hole. That's how you measure a shock. That's how you measure a lot of stuff in the power sports world. So make sure you measure those, and if you can, put that in your listing. That way customers know, hey, this is exactly the size that I need. It measures the exact same as mine. Brake pedals, another thing. It's just cheap part. Again, aftermarket companies make these. I wouldn't be so scared about buying an aftermarket brake lever or a brake pedal, because there's not a lot that can go wrong with this part. So what I do, sometimes we'll include, if I can find it right off the bat here, this is your rear brake rod. I'm not seeing right offhand, but what I'll do sometimes is include the actual pivot bolt here. So we've got a pivot bolt that runs through here, runs to your brake assembly here. So it kind of sits just like that, if you can see there. Sometimes, because this is only worth $8, this is only worth $8, I'll include both of these together. They're not worth $16, but you know what, maybe they're worth $15. You saved a little bit in shipping because you're only shipping one part as opposed to 2. Just something to think about. Try to work smarter there, not harder. And then you can make more money that way. Mounts like this, headlight mounts, speedometer mounts, stuff like that, you want to make sure that those are straight. If you set those on, if you've got a good floor, good countertop, something that's straight, a lot of times you can set it on there like that. Okay, you can see, okay, there's quite a bit of movement in one area. It's probably not straight. Try to find that part. If you can straighten it out, great. If you can't, like this one here's just got a little bit of a nick in that metal, and that could potentially be a problem. So keep that in mind when you're going to sell it. What I like to do, I think I mentioned this earlier, but when I go to take this picture, this mount is actually in relatively good condition, straight-wise. Just a little bit of a crack here, a little bit of a tear on the side here. So what I'll do is I'll take my picture, and in my last picture here, I'll point to the actual damage. That way, when I'm going through and listing this part, I can say, hey, there's a little bit of damage on this part. Just keep that in mind when you're buying it. Speedometer gear here with the speedometer cable. Again, kind of the same thing as this, the brake pedal. Speedometer housing here used to be worth $30. Prices have dropped substantially, especially on this Yamaha Maxim parts, the 650 and the 750. The Suzuki GS parts are the same way. Those parts aren't worth hardly anything. So if you can put 2 parts together and sell them, a lot of times you're going to be money ahead. So speedometer gear here, we've got the cable and the speedometer gear, probably worth $8, probably worth $4. Put them together, maybe they're worth $12. And then you've saved a little bit on shipping. Speedometer cables, you don't want to crease those tight, so I'll just do one loop around, kind of keep it together there, keep parts from flying all over the place. So, running out of parts in my bin here. I've got a handful of parts over here, as you can see, wire harness, stuff like that, but I like to take and I'll go through and clean all these up. Just go through every single part here to make sure that I know what we have. A top triple clamp here, or top bridge, some people call it. There's about 15 different names for this part here, and call it whatever you want. Handlebar clamp, just countless names. But I like to clean these up. Sometimes these get bent, sometimes these get damaged when you lay it over. A lot of times road rash will just destroy the threads on this side or destroy where your bolt is here. So those are sometimes worth, you know, a good $20, $25. Shifter parts here, same thing. Got 3 or 4, actually you've got about 7 different parts here if you were to buy this from Yamaha directly, but I'm gonna take and sell them all together. This linkage here is, you know, sometimes those go bad just because it is kind of a tie rod setup here, and these ball joints, these joints in here tend to go bad. So not a real common problem, but it is possible. Another thing here, we've got relays. Now we don't exactly know which relays these are. We never marked them. A lot of times we don't go through and figure out, okay, this is the rear, this is the front. When they look identical to this, sometimes they are identical, so you don't have to mark them at all. Sometimes it's good if you've got a top and bottom one. If they're installed like this on the bike, sometimes you can mark just T and a B, top and bottom, right and left, R and an L. And when you get to take pictures, just make sure you include those. Now, these are identical, and if I remember right on the microfiche, they have the exact same part number. What I do if I want to sell these separately, I'll take a picture of this. I'll throw up the number 2 in my picture. That way when I know when I go to list this part, hey, there's 2 of this exact same thing. If I want to include both of them, if I'm selling both of them together, which will be the case because these aren't worth very much money, I'll make sure and picture both of them together. Now, if you throw up 2 and you put quantity 2 in there, make sure you picture both. Sometimes they'll have maybe different numbers on the back. Sometimes they'll have a scratch in one area or a rip in one area. And you want to make sure that the buyer sees both of those parts. They don't just see one picture. It's nothing worse if you go to sell this shock, complete chrome, beautiful part, and you get a piece of junk shock that shows up. You say, well, you had quantity 2 there. One of them was great, one of them wasn't. Picture both of them. Different pictures. Just let the buyer know, hey, one of these is in better condition than the other one. You get what you get. Or, you know what, tell me which one you want. I can try to get you that part if you're the first buyer. That way you aren't doing the bait and switch, which is extremely frustrating for buyers. Causes buyers to shop elsewhere, which is not what we want. Got a battery box there, just double check strap there. A lot of times these get dry rot. A lot of times these plastic housings are cracked and beat up. We've got a boot here for our starter relay. Sometimes, actually a lot of times, I'll take and pull that off and I'll include it with our starter relay because this boot to this housing is not very valuable. This boot to the starter relay, probably a little more valuable. And it all depends on what you're looking for. But typically, you buy a box like this because your box is cracked, your box is destroyed, your box is missing. You don't buy a battery box because it's got a rubber boot attached to it. Just try to think smarter, not harder. Rear foot pegs here, the mounts, make sure. I will a lot of times sell these as a set, not because a buyer lays over his bike on both sides, so it kind of goes against everything I told you on this, okay? Not because a rider's going to lay a bike over on both sides, but we didn't mark these when they came off. They're not very valuable. Sometimes people just want a part like this for a spare because at some point they will lay it over. So a lot of times I'll sell these together. If this is only worth $12 and it costs you $7.33 to ship it, you're not making a lot of money. If you can throw them both together and sell them for $15 and it costs you $7.33 to ship it, you've made more money than selling both of these for $10, if that makes sense. just do some quick math there and you can figure out what I was saying. This model has a steering stabilizer. You want to inspect that, make sure it's straight, make sure it's in good condition, make sure that shock's working good. Kind of a cool feature on these models. Now, well, for the last 20 years, you've been able to get these aftermarket. Don't quote me on this, but 1982, this bike with a steering stabilizer, that's the Cadillac right there. Now, I actually wasn't born in the 1982 area, but if I was buying a bike and it had a stabilizer, I think that was pretty cool. We've got ignition switch here, completely destroyed. We're not going to take and sell this as a good working ignition switch. So keep that in mind. You're not going to take that up there. You're not going to just throw that on the counter and take a picture of it and say, hey, there's no back to this. Nobody's going to want a piece of junk like this. Ignition switch isn't even I don't know, it's just a pile of garbage. So you can throw it away. What I do is I've got a bucket here. This is called the miscellaneous pile. You see online, you've got a lot of people listed miscellaneous bolts for sale. So what I do, I'll throw parts like this. This is the remainder of the ignition switch here. I'll throw parts like this in the miscellaneous bolt bin here, and I'll sell this as a set. Probably worth $29. Somebody's saying, hey, I need the internal parts to the ignition switch. I can buy this entire set for $29, get a whole bunch of random bolts for my bike, and get the ignition switch part that I want. Or I can go to Yamaha, buy this part for $200 and get the ignition switch complete. So it all depends on what the buyer's after, but you like to give them that option. Kickstand here, another relay here. Just clean these up really good. Again, if I was tearing this apart, I would have put that bolt back in there, and that way that person would have had that specialty bolt. So kind of wanted to give you an idea of what I do during the day. Everything now is going to be pictured and listed online for sale. If you're needing Yamaha Maxim parts, check my eBay store. I've got tens of thousands of parts listed there, and I've got 8,000 parts listed there. I've got tens of thousands of parts that need to get listed. Check my other YouTube videos for how-to stuff, service stuff. We service all makes and models. And then we go through and we'll sell online parts for just thousands of different years, models, four-wheelers, anything power sports, jet skis, watercraft, sport four-wheelers, utility four-wheelers, Rangers, utility vehicles. So definitely check out my YouTube channel, check out my eBay store, and if there's something I can help you with, let me know. Thanks for watching.